Welcome to ParadoxWalk podcast, specializing in paranormal activity, cryptids, UFOs, glitches in the Matrix, anything completely out of the ordinary, unexplainable, supernatural, you name it. If it's weird, I will cover it. It is the middle of September, the year 2022. This is episode 11. Today I'll be talking about a soldier who claimed to see a man turn into a tree right before his very eyes. A lot of us remember a yellow sun all day long. Nowadays, we only see a yellow sun at sunrise and sunset, if you're lucky. There's record of photographers and artists that are very, very good with colors that have written in emails way back in 2002 to the Coast to Coast Art Bell Show, telling him that they were noticing slight changes in the colors from the sun, that it was becoming more white. And keep in mind, a lot of people remember a yellow sun all day long. I'm talking like the 90s. The first email he reads is, quote, "Burning. The sun feels different. I always spent much time in the sun. I have dark skin and tan darkly. I've never had much problem with sunburn. I live in Colorado, and I know the atmosphere is thin, but the other day I was running my dog, and I tell you the sun felt like it was searing my skin. And I know it's not my imagination, and also constantly I have this idea. I don't know how to explain it, but I can't help but get the feeling that everything is getting sterile. My customers tell me that the sun just feels more intense." Then Art says, or this email, and he reads another one, quote, "Art, I thought I was losing my mind or succumbing to paranoia until hearing you talking about the strangeness of the sun. For about a year, I've had this feeling that the sun, even out here in Manhattan, that the sun just feels wrong. Too big, too white, too hot, in the wrong place. And I don't know any other way to describe it. Even sunglasses don't offer that much protection anymore, and I find myself shielding my eyes crossing the street to get to shade. The sun literally seems to be too low in the sky. There are days when one can't even tell if they're walking right into the sun. Fascinating, but a little disturbed." Then Art reads another one, and he says, or this one, "Art, I'm a painter of watercolors. The light, the quality of the light is what I notice. It's what us painters key into. And I too have noticed that the sun is more white and less yellow. Light striking us is more penetrating. Sometimes it feels just like needles. I've even noticed that the sun penetrating and heating up my mattress, even if the ambient temperature is not that high." I couldn't help but remember what Ed Dames said about the sun. I don't know about Ed Dames, but another email comes into Art Bell, and he reads it, quote, "I'm a photographer and extremely aware of light variations, and thank you for bringing up the changing light of the sun." He couldn't read them all because he's got a show to do, so he ended up saying that he had a landslide of emails, and this is 2002, of people agreeing. He said he just had write-in after write-in of this stuff, people agreeing that the nature, the color, the feel of the sun, the intensity of the sun was changing. The sky was blue, the sun was yellow. Nowadays, it's like, if I was going to draw the sky, the sun would be white. It just sounds so crazy, right? But anybody over, 30 years old, you're going to pretty much agree with me. It's so bizarre. The only thing I can think of is like Book of Revelation type stuff. I'd like to thank Dan from the channel Dreams in the Cosmic Trip for posting about this episode of the Art Bell Show. It's really important that, especially way back in 2002, that artists and people that notice that type of thing were noticing this way back then. When the moon is in a phase, I've heard other people talk about this too, when it's in the waxing gibbous or waning gibbous, whatever those are called, where it's not a full moon, the other side, you can still kind of see it. And back in the day, like in the, in the 90s and stuff, if the moon wasn't full, it was black on the side that was still kind of covered. So you can still see something there, like it's not quite black, kind of grayish. I'm surprised that isn't more of a thing, like people talking about, like the crescent moon, you know what I mean? Like the side that's not lit up is like a grayish, like grayed out. It's just bizarre. Like it used to look just totally black. It was just blacked out, like the sky. Those are two things. Those are two big things and I've seen other people comment on that. I've also heard, I don't know much about this, but I heard that there's a new type of UV ray that's being emitted by the sun. I have heard about that. Somebody that knows more about that can maybe leave a comment. But so worldmaparchive.tumblr.com. The title is World Maps in One Try, a collection by Benjamin Polach. And the basic idea, so I can get through this really quick, is this man's idea was people take a blank piece of paper without looking at Google, without looking at a map, without looking at the internet, just draw the world how they remember it. And this was his idea, and he wanted them to mail them in. And a bunch of people did. So on this Tumblr page is more than 100. It was open to anybody. So there's like a lot of little kids. Some people did funny things. Some people did like cubism. So you can't really tell. But when they did do a map, everybody put South America directly under North America, or pretty close. If it was shifted to the side, it was very, very not extreme. It was Peru, Chile would be pretty much under California's time zone, and Brazil, like the East Coast, would be pretty close to the East Coast of the United States. This is what I remember. I'm sure many of you listening remember that as well. So, surprise, South America is basically like shifted to where most of it is underneath the East Coast of the United States. Like, it just sounds so weird. How many of us grew up looking at maps was all those maps wrong? Like, how does this work? I bring it up because I listen to this guy talking about they consider that a Mandela effect, and people get angry about that. They're like, continents can't move. And then someone brought up a point. If you're kind of assumption that physical matter are more subjected to consciousness more than the other way around, if that's true, where consciousness kind of is at a higher level than physical matter, then entire continent moving would be no different than a Kit Kat dash disappearing. Like, why would one thing be more, solid and immovable than the other? I thought that was an interesting point. In the future, I want to get into this one thing called like quantum back history. I have to find the experiment and be able to explain it so it's not boring. With like the detectors, quantum physics like hates being detected, right? It's like the double slit experiment, but then they added another step to where the physical matter like loads a back history of what it did that like kind of counteracts how we would think, something like that would work. Not very cool to explain it like that, but I'm sorry, I just kind of went off the cuff a little bit. So I remembered this book I read when I was a kid. It's called Mostly Harmless. It's written by Douglas Adams. And he described something like a Mandela effect way back then. This was like early 90s or something when he wrote this book. The character in the book, he was on some weird like spaceship accident where they went through some kind of wormhole glitch in the Matrix type thing. And his wife or girlfriend that was sitting next to him suddenly disappeared. She wasn't on the flight manifest. Her seat wasn't even warm when he put his hand on the seat. And they never heard of her. So they were like, yo, you just made her up or something like that, right? Or you had a false memory. And he ends up at this place that's supposed to be Earth, but in this other dimension type thing. So I'm going to read when he picks up a map. This is him describing the map. Quote, this is Chapter 7 of the book Mostly Harmless. There was one huge landmass off to the upper left-hand side of the page that tapered down to a tiny waist. So he's describing Mexico and Central America. And then it ballooned out again like a large comma. So that's how you would describe saying this is like a version of Earth. He doesn't say anything about curving to the side. Mexico and Central America does not spin off to the east or anything. So tapered down to a tiny waist. What does tapered down mean? It means getting skinnier. So he's just describing the top landmass going down, getting skinnier, and it turns into like a comma shape. That's what I remember. That's what everyone else remembers. But all of a sudden, when you look at a map, it's like this weird, twisted, turned horn for like Mexico and Central America, and like South America is just way over in a totally different time zone. Yeah, check out that like drawing contest, but it is fascinating. Every single person just draws the same exact thing, like Central America directly under North America and South America pretty much directly underneath North America. Basically the East Coast lines up with the East Coast of, like Brazil and that, and the West Coast and Baja California kind of lines up with Chile and Peru in a general sense. Besides that, I got some stories here. So this was a 2016 call. This was a call to Coast Radio. This is a soldier stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. So the soldier and some other people were doing maneuvers, and he was put on a radio watch for the evening. And it was kind of a boring night until another man arrived, and this is the soldier talking, quote, so I'm sitting there doing my little hour-long shift, and we've got the ranchers there. Sometimes, like military bases, they take they take over so much land that they have these certain times where they let cattle ranchers bring their cows up to eat the grass and stuff like that. And then at a certain time they're supposed to be going, and the soldiers, if the land isn't cleared, they have to go kick them off. And this is him quoting, quote, "So we got the ranchers there, and they've got the cattle range on this land, and the cattle would eat the grass. Well, one of the ranchers came up to our area of operation, and he had this little whip, and so I was kind of talking to him because I was bored, and there wasn't much else going on. And he didn't speak any English, and my Spanish is really bad, so I was like, great, I can practice, and that'll help me stay awake." According to Tim, their little chat lasted for a while, eating up the rest of his time. Eventually, he realized that his shift was coming to an end, and he had to wake up the next guy for his shift. The farmers aren't supposed to be there, at that time, so I'm like, "Hey, man, you gotta go." And he wouldn't leave. Finally, I grabbed hold of him, and he turned into a bush. Tim claims that the man he was talking to for several minutes suddenly morphed into a bush right in front of his eyes. He just turned into a tree. That tree wasn't there when we set up, and he was gone, and he just turned into a tree. I was like, oh my God. And, I got the next guy up, and it was his time, and he was talking about, why did we put our camp right here with this tree in the middle? According to Tim, the tree was not there when they arrived at the location. Even though he could not explain it, the man he was conversing with had turned into a 5 or 6 foot tall tree. So another channel that covered this story is called Beyond Creepy. I've mentioned that channel a number of times because it's probably my all-time favorite for YouTube. Let's look at some of the comments after Beyond Creepy channel covered this case. First one here, quote, "Where I live, there are plenty of cases of sightings of very tall men walking through the fields. When the workers of the fields drive the tractors or walk towards those figures and get close enough to them, they realize it's a tree that wasn't there. It's scary because the trees appear in the middle of a plowed field. These tall figures just walk like a man in a very determined way, and then they stop when they sense people nearby. These sightings have been happening for a very long time because the elderly remember tales or sightings they personally had." Here's another one, but it's not necessarily a tree, but these types of forest or field spirits being able to change into something. Some of the things I've heard is actual trolls, real trolls, can really turn into big rocks. I know I've heard of a case of some kids chasing something like a troll through a farm, and it ran behind a barn, and then when they ran behind the barn after it, when they turned the corner, there was a big old boulder there. And they couldn't move the boulder, they couldn't even budge it, but they knew that troll turned into a big rock. I've heard of that before, not just this one time. That's also featured in that kids movie Frozen, isn't it? When the guy he walks up to a big area full of these little rocks with moss all over them, and then these things roll around and unfold into trolls. So here's this comment, quote, "We went to metal detect," when they wave that thing over the ground and try to find rings and things. "We went to metal detect in a rural area upstate New York that we have hunted many times before. On site, we discovered something that had not been there the previous day. There, in the middle of this forested area, was a huge boulder, easily the size of half of a bus. We thought we were in the wrong spot until we found the old cellar hole that we've been digging bottles out of. Our cellar hole was 12 feet away from this gigantic boulder that was never there before. The boulder had a crack in the middle that ran from top to bottom and was wide enough to walk through. In the middle of the crack was a Y-shaped branch stuck into the ground, just like X marks the spot, but Y marks the spot, I guess. We dug under that branch. I guess they thought that maybe that was supposed to be marking something, so they dug underneath it and found nothing. I'm 70 years old now, and I don't care if you believe this or not." Here's another one, quote, "There are reports of Bigfoot morphing into trees, and a couple of kids were climbing on a seriously shaped tree." I don't know what seriously shaped tree means. Maybe out of the ordinary type of tree? Okay, so continuing to quote here, "When one of the kids got a feeling of a message telling him that they shouldn't be climbing on the trees. So he called his other friend down, and after they walked away, he turned around and that tree was gone."